In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, the Beneficent, the Merciful, Master of this day of judgment. Thee alone do we serve, and Thee alone do we seek for help. O Allah, guide us on the straight path, the path of those whom Thou hast bestowed favors, not the path of those whom Thy wrath is brought down upon, nor of those who go astray. Ameen. You may be seated. At this time, brothers and sisters, we're going to direct your attention to the screens as we have a very important and powerful and short video montage to get us prepared for this plenary session. Let us begin.
I know it's difficult for us to wrap our minds around wickedness so great that people would plot to get the country into war at the expense of young, patriotic men and women. But this is exactly what has happened. The U.S. Maine was a lying wonder. World War I, the lies told. World War II, lies told. Vietnam, lies told. And here, 9/11, the World Trade Center destroyed. 9/11 was very, very strange. 19 Muslims were put before the American public and the world 2 days after this heinous attack. But before this, the neocons that were surrounding President Bush said that America needed something like Pearl Harbor to summon the American people in their anger and horror over what happened. 9/11 was America's new Pearl Harbor.
We just saw on live television as a second plane flew into the second tower of the World Trade Center. Now, given what has been going on around the world, some of the key suspects come to mind: Osama Bin Laden.
Now, there are too many strange things that we question. 5 of the 19 so-called terrorists are alive and well in Saudi.
It takes a lot of training and expertise to fly a complicated, sophisticated aircraft, whether it's a Boeing 737 or a smaller Airbus. These are not little Cessnas and little Pipers.
How does a pilot that failed his lessons on a one-engine propeller plane pull off maneuvers only a highly trained airline pilot could do? In Pennsylvania, Flight 93, only a smoking hole in the ground, no bodies, no seats, no wings, no luggage.
Can you give us any better idea of how much of the plane actually impacted the building?
You know, it might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon.
Scientists have said that the amount of heat from the fuel in the planes could never melt steel.
We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us.
Those buildings fell in free fall, like you see implosions that are controlled demolition. There was no plane that attacked the third tower, but it too fell. Something is wrong with that picture. No steel frame building before or since 9/11 has ever collapsed due to fire. There has to be in the future some real independent investigation of 9/11.
Today our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
This was the beginning of a war against Islam.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
We know that after 9/11 and all that blame was placed on Muslims, that both domestic and foreign policies were put in place. Policies that were intended to thwart the progress of Islam and limit the activities of. And now, during this heightened age of Islamophobia, we hear this anti-Muslim rhetoric taking place all the way from the highest office of the United States. So I think that a subject like this is due again, don't you? All praise is due to Allah. So the truth has to be exposed. We have to continue to uncover the lies and the liars. So we're fortunate today to have those joining us who can offer not some theories, but who can offer us empirical data, scientific facts, and some plain old common sense to get to the bottom and expose the real culprits behind this global scheme. Now that we know that some Muslims in a cave in Afghanistan somewhere were certainly not capable of such a sophisticated explosion and plan, then we have to ask ourselves, then who? Since we know it was not the Muslims, who's responsible for this heavily sophisticated plan, which is the mother of all false flag events? Well, as we said in the offset of this program, we not only want to uncover the lies, but we also want to uncover and pinpoint the liars. So to take us further, our last presenter is one of those allies that we have who will help us pinpoint who is behind and who is most responsible, who are the culprits behind these activities. We have as our final presenter, Mr. Christopher Bolin. Bolin is a well-traveled writer and an investigative journalist who has done extensive research into the events of 9/11. As a thinker, he has been highly critical of Israel. And he was also part of the, with Mr. Stephen Jones, who was one of those that found the thermite in the debris of 9/11. Now, consequently, that same year, for him being critical of Israel and the war on terror, he was attacked by a heavily armed group of police. Well, he's with us today, and to take us further to expose the culprits behind this wicked atrocity, help me to receive to the stage Mr. Christopher Bolin. Let's welcome him, family.
Hello? Can you hear me all right? It's great to be here. Salam alaikum. I want to recognize the great efforts of Minister Louis Farrakhan in being the only religious leader in our nation who has addressed the gigantic, horrendous fraud of 9/11. You see, 9/11 was used to take us into an open-ended war against Islamic nations. And that's where this nation has been for the past 15 years. And not a single religious leader other than Minister Farrakhan has had the moral compass to stand up and tell the faithful that we've been lied to. So, I've written this book, Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World. It's changed our world. 9/11 was carried out to kickstart the war on terror, a Zionist war agenda of aggression, terrorism, and conquest, which continues to this day. 9/11 was wrongly blamed on Muslims to trick us as a nation, as a world, into supporting an open-ended and criminal war agenda across the Islamic world. It's cost us more than $2.5 trillion, and we as people of conscience are obliged to resist the deception, as our religious leaders all should do. I was an investigative journalist in Washington, D.C. when it happened, so it fell right into my lap. I was passing through New York City with my family when 9/11 happened. I grew up in Chicago, outside in a place called Schaumburg, Illinois. Here's my book, The Deception That Changed the World. 9/11 was a highly sophisticated false flag terror atrocity designed to create fear and rage in the people's hearts, to compel U.S. public opinion to support the war on terror, which is an Israeli Zionist war agenda in disguise that we are supposed to fight. Starting the war on terror was the real reason for 9/11. 9/11 was, of course, a policy coup that brought us the war on terror and a series of wars like this one in Iraq. We've been deceived. We've been lied to. 9/11 was just the beginning. Starting the war of aggression was the real reason for the terrorism. We will not have peace as a nation or a world if we continue to accept the deception of 9/11. The media has been the key player in the deception. We've been lied to by the media. The media is complicit in the cover-up. They have imposed on the American public the false story that radical Islamic terrorists are to blame for 9/11. And the only way to liberate ourselves and our nations from this madness is to expose the true source of terrorism. The U.S. government on 9/11 called the attacks an act of war, which basically made it the military's business to seek justice for. So there was no actual criminal investigation. Larry Johnson from the State Department, Director of Counterterrorism, said these guys were extremely well organized, talking about the hijackers, the alleged hijackers. He said these guys were just committed zealots and willing to give it up without being key members of the network. They were told what to do, what to prepare for, what to train for. They were not the ones calling the shots. He said, we don't have anything in history to compare with this. The only thing that comes close to it is a former Soviet intelligence operation. So who pulled this off? Now, if the government and media are lying to us about 9/11, it means that they are controlled by the very same people who carried out 9/11. Now that's a very serious predicament. And Minister Farrakhan's the only person who's addressing it. Now 9/11 and the War on Terror have a common source. Both 9/11 and the War on Terror were conceived and planned in Israel in the 1970s by Israeli military intelligence. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the War on Terror. 9 days after 9/11, George Bush declared a war on terror, basically telling the world, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. So the fraudulent war on terror is all based on the 9/11 lies. Where did the war on terror come from? Where did Americans start to learn to treat people like this? Well, the war on terror, I'm going to talk about the evolution of an Israeli stratagem. Now, a stratagem is a clever device to trick people into serving them. The war on terror is an Israeli stratagem, a ploy pushed by Benjamin Netanyahu since 1979 to trick the United States into waging war against Israel's enemies. Here he was in 1979. He worked for a Rothschild company called Boston Consulting. He went back to Israel and he started a Netanyahu Institute. The very first thing they did in 1979, they had a conference in Jerusalem called the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism. They tried to say that all international terrorism is a propaganda offensive. They said that all international terrorism was coming from the Soviet Union. And George Bush spoke at the final, Mr. Bush Sr. spoke at the final session and said that basically the idea of fighting terrorism was a great thing to do as a war. Now, Mr. Netanyahu is currently the Prime Minister of Israel. He has made a career out of promoting the war on terror, writing books like this. Now, Mr. Netanyahu is from the Likud coalition, Likud. The Likud was created by the father of terrorism, a man named Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin in 1977 became Prime Minister of Israel. And he was asked by a British journalist in 1974, Mr. Begin, how does it feel in the light of all that's going on to be the father of terrorism in the Middle East? And Mr. Begin said, in the Middle East? He said, in all the world. So he put on himself the mantle of being the father of terrorism. You see, you have to understand that the state of Israel was born and created through terrorism. This is 1946. This is one of the first things he did as head of the Irgun. The Irgun is the mother party of the Likud. He blew up the King David Hotel, killing 93 people. It was British headquarters during the British Mandate period in Palestine. It's very, very similar to 9/11. Here he is. He came from Russia, came to Palestine, became the leader of the Irgun, bombed the King David Hotel, created the Deir Yassin massacre, where they blew up buildings in a Palestinian village called Deir Yassin in order to scare the Palestinians that they would run away. And then he created the Likud party in 73, became prime minister in 77. That's when Israel changed from being a relatively peaceful country to becoming a vicious terrorist state, 1977. And the ideology of the Likud is based on this idea called Eretz Israel, Greater Israel. This idea that Israel should fill its biblical boundaries, as they say God gave to the state of Israel. And so they have a much bigger idea of what Israel should be. And they are dedicated to reaching that state. That's very important to understand. This is what they call what Israel's future borders should look like. And as Mr. Begin said, Jerusalem was and forever will be our capital. And Eretz Israel will be restored to the people of Israel. Now, this is what Begin said in 1947, and this is exactly what the Likud still continues to say to this day. So here he became the president of the country, the prime minister of the country in 1977. This happened to be a time when I was living in Israel. They came to power, 77. Now, one of his partners was this man, Yitzhak Shamir. And I want to point out that this is a member, this was the head of the Lehi, or the Stern gang. This was a gang of murderers. They killed the UN envoy, Volker Bernadotte. They killed rocket scientists. And his little gang called the Stern Gang had a very interesting member who was this man's father. This is Rahm Emanuel. He's the mayor of my hometown, Chicago. And his father was a member of the Stern Gang when they killed that UN ambassador. Now, here are some of the fathers of terrorism. This is a photograph from the Lavon affair. The Israelis did a false flag terror attacks in Egypt back in 1954 in July. And it was run by these men here. On the left is Shimon Peres, then Mr. Lavon, then Moshe Dayan and his assistant. And they blew up, they put bombs in American and British libraries in Egypt with the intention of the blame being put on the Muslim Brotherhood. Because the Prime Minister of Israel said after this event, he didn't know about it, but Shimon Peres had been running it. And he said Shimon Peres shares the same ideology. He wants to frighten the West into supporting Israel's aims. And that is exactly where we are here today with terrorism. They're trying to frighten us all the time into supporting their war agenda. But it's not our agenda, and it's not an American agenda. In 1948, before Israel became a state, the Joint Chiefs of Staff analyzed what this Israeli Zionist state. Zionism means Israeli nationalism, Jewish nationalism. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff said this. They wrote this in their 13th paper. They said, Zionist strategy will seek to involve the United States in a continuously widening and deepening series of operations intended to secure maximum Jewish objectives. And what were those maximum Jewish objectives? The expansion of Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, into Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and the establishment of Jewish military and economic hegemony over the entire Middle East. As you can see, that's what the United States has been doing for the past 15 years. Now, these were the strategic goals of the father of Israel, Ben Gurion, who was another Rothschild employee. He said in 1948, after Israel became a state, he said we should go on the offensive and smash Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and then take out Jordan, Syria will fall, and if Egypt dares to resist, we'll bomb Cairo. This is the Prime Minister of Israel 1 week after the nation became a state. This is, of course, what Israel did to the United States. Many people will say, oh, Israel wouldn't do that. They wouldn't attack us. Well, read your history, 1967. They attacked this ship, and the Tel Aviv said, from the radio control, said, identify the ship. The pilot said, it's American, American. Tel Aviv control said, sink the ship, no survivors. Now, a week after 9/11, this General Wesley Clark walked through the Pentagon, and he said, about 10 days after 9/11, I went to the Pentagon, I saw Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz, and one of the generals called me in and he said, we've made the decision, we're going to war with Iraq. We're going to war with Iraq, he said. Why? I don't know, he said. I came back a few weeks later, he said, and by that time we were bombing Afghanistan. And he said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And the general said, oh, sir, it's much worse than that. We're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off with Iran. And as you can see, that shopping list is exactly what we've been doing for the past 15 years. Now, what's the master plan? It's a Zionist master plan to dominate the entire region by breaking up the large Arab countries into ethnic statelets. It's called Balkanization. It's exactly what we did in Yugoslavia in the 1990s. We took a big country and broke it into little pieces, fracturing it along religious lines or ethnic lines. This is the plan that the Israeli likud came out with, a man named Oded Yinon, in 1982. And thanks to Israel Shahak, a professor of chemistry, he translated it into English, and we now understand what the Israeli plan is for the Middle East. It's exactly what's happened to Iraq, to Syria, to Libya, to Sudan, to Somalia, to Yemen. All have been victimized by this plan, breaking them up. Who's behind it? Well, here we have a picture from the Pentagon we have something called the Defense Policy Board. These are mostly Zionist men. Here we have Wolfowitz and Rabbi Dov Zakheim across the table, and the Israeli boy Douglas Feith, and they're sitting right next to the Israeli Chief of Staff in the Pentagon. And he's telling them, well, this is what you should do. And that's what we've done. They advise us, the Israelis tell our Pentagon what we should be doing. Here's Hillary Clinton, and this is 2012 when she was Secretary of State, and she wrote in that email, the best way to help Israel is to use force to overthrow the government in Syria. Where is there American interest in overthrowing the government in Syria? None. But this proves that Obama and Hillary Clinton were serving Israeli ends, not American. So 22 years after it was first promoted, this idea of a war on terror in Jerusalem, it became reality with 9/11. It was born. Now I'm going to talk about the Israeli connections to 9/11. Number one, ideation. The Israelis put out the idea that planes might be flying into big buildings one day. This is a film by a senior Israeli agent named Arnon Milchan, a Hollywood producer, a very high-level Israeli agent. He made this film in 1978 called The Medusa Touch, in which a large Boeing plane flies into the Pan Am building in New York City. This is from the movie. Now, is this coincidence or is this prescience? Now, the thing is that he's very close, and the picture shows him with the defense minister of Israel, Ezer Weitzman. This is at the very highest level of Israeli military intelligence. And here he's making the movie. Here he is, he's worth $5.2 billion, and you can see he's very close to the very highest level establishment in Israel. Shimon Peres and Bibi Netanyahu, two of the most notorious Israeli terrorists in history. Then, in the year 2000, with his business partner Rupert Murdoch of Fox News, they made a TV program called The Lone Gunman, in which a Boeing 757 is flown into the World Trade Center. And this was on TV in March 2001 on Fox News. 13 million people watched it. This is putting the idea out there into your mind that planes might be striking big buildings one day. Now, the next thing is the father of Israeli intelligence, this man Isser Harel, he predicted in 1979 that Islamic or Arabs would attack the tallest buildings in New York City. He predicted to this man, this Jewish man here with Menachem Begin, and he said, Mr. Evans asked Harel, Isser Harel, do you think terrorism will come to America? And if so, where and why? Isser Harel said, yes, I fear it will come to you in America. America has the power but not the will to fight terrorism. As to where, Harel continued, New York City is the symbol of freedom and capitalism. It's likely they will strike your tallest building and a symbol of your power. 1979, 22 years before 9/11. Then number three, the Israeli Mossad got the security contract for the World Trade Center in 1987 because they actually intended that 9/11 would happen in the 1980s, but they were delayed because the Port Authority discovered that the man involved was not only an Israeli intelligence agent, but he was using a fake name. He was using a false name. They often do. So they tore up the contract. The Port Authority, the owners of the World Trade Center, they tore up the contract. Had they not done that, 9/11 would have happened, as I say, in the late 80s. But when those Israelis were thwarted, they didn't go back to Israel. They went to work with American Jews who were working in the World Trade Center, namely Jules Kroll and Maurice Greenberg. And in 1993, when the building was bombed the first time, Jules Kroll, the man at the top here, got the security contract for the World Trade Center. And at that time, that Israeli man that was the head of the Shin Bet was now working for him. So they used a Trojan horse to get into the World Trade Center. Number four, Israeli military intelligence created Al-Qaeda. They created the Islamic foe for the war on terror. Because if you're going to have a big war on terror, you have to have an enemy. So they have to create the enemy. So under Ehud Barak in the early 1980s, Israeli military intelligence trained a group in Pakistan of Afghan fighters and Arabs called Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, faction Hizb Islami. At this time, this is when the what they call the Afghan Arabs. The Arabs came to Afghanistan to help the Afghan fighters against the Russian army, the Soviet army. And this is the time when Israeli military intelligence, under Ehud Barak, this man on the left, was running the operation. The CIA was paying for it, and Saudi Arabia were paying for it. Pakistan was the host country, and Israel military intelligence was doing the training in the army. It was done by a guy named Charlie Wilson, a congressman from Texas. But the question was, why would the CIA and Israelis, why would they arm the most anti-Western group out there? Because they were creating the group that became Al-Qaeda, and it had to be extremely anti-Western. Then the group, Gulbuddin, that the Israelis had trained, became Al-Qaeda in 1994. They became Al-Qaeda. Now, if you understand the current situation with ISIS, Al-Qaeda then became ISIS. So it's the Israelis create this cadre, this group of terrorists, who then change names and change places, but they remain the target. So when America strikes ISIS, when America strikes Al-Qaeda, they're actually striking Islamic nations. They're not hitting the enemy. They're fighting ISIS. They're hitting infrastructure, power plants, water plants, hospitals. Here we have plan number 6. It's the Zionist plan for the new Pearl Harbor. This was planned in advance. This man, Philip Zelikow, had a catastrophic terrorism study group in which they were imagining the transforming event that would change this nation. This was published 2 years before 9/11. Now, this is another point. The Israeli Mossad controlled security at U.S. airports, the key U.S. airports, on 9/11. And the men that ran this company, ICTS, based in Holland, are these characters here. Mr. Shukerman, Yair Shamir, the son of Shamir, and Boaz Harel. It's a Rothschild company. They controlled passenger screening at Boston Airport, Newark Airport, etc. They controlled who got on the planes. Now, then again, Israelis created false histories for these men. 15 of these 19 supposed hijackers lived in Florida, where many of them had been given duplicate licenses, and others had reported having lost their passports. So what you have is a game where you have two people that are using the same identity. One is an Israeli agent that looks like him, and one is the person himself. In this way, they leave a fake trail for that person, incriminating him. 9/11, in July 2001, Zionists got the lease for the World Trade Center. Zionist is, again, Israeli nationalists, people who believe in Israel over everything else. It's a political ideology. It's not a religion, it's not a race, it's not an ethnicity. It's a political ideology, flat and simple. Now, how that happened, how did Larry Silverstein get the World Trade Center is very interesting. He got it through Ronald Lauder. Ronald Lauder, the son of Estee Lauder, he was in charge of the privatization scheme for New York State. And in this scheme, they decided to privatize the World Trade Center. Now, Mr. Lauder also funds a school at Mossad University in Israel called the IDC. And at the IDC, the person who runs his school is Major General Danny Rothschild. The Rothschild family of Britain and France, they built Israel. They paid for Israel. They built the first 30 settlements. The first one is called Rishon LeZion, the first in Zion. That's where Danny Rothschild was born. So they made a few children as well to carry on the family genes. Well, finally, Larry Silverstein, on July 24th, he got the Twin Towers in his hand. And then he controlled everything about the building. The first thing he did was he jacked the rent up 40% and insured it against terrorism. This is what was left 5 weeks later of the World Trade Center. All that was left was steel and dust. And on September 11th, the Israeli military chief, Ehud Barak, the one who had trained Osama Bin Laden, came on the BBC. He happened to be in London. He happened to be in the studio of the BBC World Television, the largest television network in the English-speaking world. And he said this. He said, it's time to launch an operational, concrete war against terror. He said the world will never be the same from today on. And he blamed Osama Bin Laden. What's the connection here? Ehud Barak was the commander of Bibi Netanyahu in a covert commando force called the Sayeret Matkal. This is a covert independent commando force that serves directly under the Israeli Chief of Staff and military intelligence. On 9/11, this man with the New York Police Department hat, his name is Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel. He was in New York City on September 10th and 11th, but his presence was kept out of the news completely. Why? What was he doing in September 10th and 11th in New York City that had to be kept secret? Then the Israeli son of the Mossad, Michael Chertoff, this man here, controlled the 9/11 investigation. He was put in charge. He was the Assistant Attorney General. He was supposed to prosecute the crimes of 9/11. But they didn't even investigate the crime. There has never been an investigation of 9/11. Full stop. And then the Zionists, a Zionist again is a supporter of Israel, they presided over the 9/11 lawsuits and tort litigation. There were 3,000 victims. That was a lot of litigation. It all went to this man, Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein in Manhattan. Now there's a problem here. His son is a lawyer in Israel who works for the key defendant in the 9/11 litigation, that company I told you about, ICTS, the people who were responsible for this passenger screening at the airports. If those 19 hijackers got on the plane, they would know how they got on. The conflict of interest was his son was working, as I said, for the law firm that controlled that ICTS company. So that's a primary family conflict of interest. A judge cannot oversee a case when his son or his wife is working for the defendant. That's completely not right. The 15th point is Benjamin Netanyahu admits that 9/11 benefits Israel. He said on 9/11 to the New York Times, he was asked, how will this affect Israeli-American relations? And Netanyahu said, it's very good. It will generate immediate sympathy. Who would say it's very good when there are 30,000 people who are thought to be in the rubble dead? A couple years later, he said in Hebrew, speaking to an Israeli audience, he said, we are benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq. Israel is benefiting from that, not America. And then the point that the Zionists control the myth. They wrote the myth. This man, Philip Zelikow, was in charge of the 9/11 Commission, and he wrote the outline for the report before the people even began working on the report. And this man's specialty, he went to school, he's a Zionist, he went to school and he got a master's degree or a PhD on the creation and maintenance of the public myth. Because what we've been sold is a myth. We've been told a myth that Islam is trying to attack our nation. And unfortunately, Donald Trump still supports that myth. He was in Tampa the other day and he said radical Islamic terrorists are determined to attack this nation as they did on 9/11. That's false. And for Donald Trump to say that that's the case is a very, very dangerous thing. And for 15 years, the controlled media has pushed the false story about 9/11 and the war on terror, all the while suppressing all evidence that disproves the official myth. Why does the media do this? Because we have today, almost all of the media in this country is owned by 6 companies. And those 6 companies are owned by the Rothschilds. Here we have media moguls like Rupert Murdoch, who push the lies about 9/11 and the war on terror. They are complicit in a criminal cover-up with the people who did 9/11. Now, the Rothschild banksters create people like Mr. Murdoch so they control all the public opinion in this country. That's what the media in the country today, in NBC, CBS, CNN, Fox News. It's psychological warfare against the American people 24/7. And this is my final slide. This is summing up my analysis. And this is from Dr. Alan Sabrowski, who wrote this paper called Treason, Betrayal, and Deceit, 9/11 Beyond. And he said the evidential trail for 9/11 and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq runs from PNAC, AIPAC, the Israeli lobby and their cohorts, through the mostly Jewish neocons in the Bush administration and back to the Israeli government. None of the denials and political machinations can alter that essential reality. And that's what I'm saying, is that we've been fooled, we've been tricked, we've been deceived into a war, and this is not our interest at all. This is an Israeli war agenda that we have been tricked into fighting. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum.